Okay, so my last video on political correctness was a little open-ended because I've run out of time. With this new video format, I have a time limit, so I'm going to try and keep this well under 10 minutes in order to say what I want to say. Um, I finished off that I was sort of cut off by the video by saying that if the police or legislators recognize that a particular problem is there's a trend within a particular community that can be connected to that problem, they need to have the freedom to say so. Give an example. In London, there is a problem with black on black crime. Now, is saying that is that saying all young black men are criminals? Of course not. Is it saying that there's no white criminals? Of course not. But it's simply recognition of a trend. Even Tony Blair said that there shouldn't be political correctness in dealing with those issues. I say even Tony Blair because Britain's New Labour was notorious for pushing a very politically correct agenda. Um, the BBC has long been accused of political correctness. Excuse me. Now, there is a caveat to this. Although I don't like political correctness, in fact, I loathe political correctness, I think there are times that genuine bigots will use it as an excuse. And there'll be times to say, for example, oh, diversity is just for the sake of political correctness. I don't entirely agree with that. If you have, for example, let's say a film set in London, and you have a pretty diverse cast, say you have black people, white people, Asian people, that's not political correctness, that's reality, because London is a diverse city. So there are times when people whinge about political correctness when it isn't entirely accurate. Nevertheless, I think the criticism of political correctness is entirely understandable. I do think it's shackling. I think it is an attack on creativity and freedom of expression. Because when it comes to the point where you have artists and singers and so on self censoring because they don't want to offend, then it is shackling. And this ties into a lot of things. It ties into people being too sensitive, but I also think it ties into actually damaging the fight against real bigotry. Now, what I mean by that is if you have someone who has suffered, for example, racist bullying, that should be condemned. But if people then say put that on a parallel with, say, a joke that is slightly borderline, and say, oh, this is the same as that, then really it mitigates racism to being less serious than it actually is. My point is that if you take everything so seriously that it's put on a parallel, then I think it actually downplays serious problems that society should take seriously. But like I said in the first video, the problem is here who gets to decide what is offence. I mean, you could have some people from a particular group saying that they're offended. That doesn't mean that they represent everyone in that particular group. I remember when there was I think it was the Kumar number 42, and do forgive me if I've got the details wrong on this because I didn't watch the show. But I think the catch was it was a comedy about a Muslim family. Now, they were British Muslim actors. That got a little bit of a backlash for the way one of the actresses was portrayed in the hijab, but they were Muslim actors. This wasn't white people putting on blackface, these were Muslim actors. So that's an example whereby even sometimes people who are from a particular community find themselves accused of offending the particular community. And that's when it gets a bit crazy. Um, I heard about one case where a man was arrested, a businessman, for having a gollywog. Now, I don't know if this case was true or not. If it is true, it symbolises how crazy political correctness could be. He was arrested for having a gollywog on the grounds that it was a symbol of racist attitudes. Now, here's the catch: the guy was black. And I've heard of cases like that. Um, Another example is the political correctness that councils take upon themselves, for example. I have to emphasize tabloids can exaggerate this. Um, and the case that I'm about to mention was 5 years ago, but I believe it was one of the Midlands councils decided to ban the word Christmas in case it offended people. A more recent example, they changed it to Winterfest. That attracted widespread controversy and criticism. More recently, Starbucks has done it. They have decided to take away Christmas-like symbols from their cups. Now, on one hand, people say, "Oh, what's a big deal? It's just cups." But to me, that is pandering to political correctness by the perception that actually that's an interesting one because the question is, which way does political correctness go there? Is it offensive to Christians? Therefore, the political correctness would be from the point of view of let's not offend Christians. Although people would say the idea of Christmas was taken from paganism anyway, but that's beside the point. Or is it political correctness the other way, that it's a perception that would offend and marginalise non-Christians? Either way, I think it was ridiculous, and I think it's a good example. Well, certainly Starbucks' explanation for it was based on political correctness. We want to diversify our customers. That was their rationale. I think that was totally ridiculous. I think it kind of made the. I mean, I remember the decorations before that. I remember afterwards. Afterwards was bland by comparison. Now, it's not something I particularly cared about. I'm not going to write petitions and get worked up about it, but I do think it's an example of political correctness. There's many, many, many examples. But basically, yeah, I think that you can stand against racism, stand against sexism, stand against homophobia and other forms of bigotry, whilst also recognizing that political correctness is shackling. Comedians, writers, actors, directors should have the artistic ability to express things in a way that sometimes might be testy, sometimes might be perceived as politically incorrect. Now, another point worth bearing in mind is in different parts of the world, sensitivities get higher and lower. In Thailand, needless to say, anything connected with the monarchy or the royal family is super sensitive. I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is true, that if you damage a Thai note because it depicts a king, that could be a lèse majesté offence. I mean, in Thailand, it's extreme. I've made my views on this very clear. Um, other parts of the world would say that's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. Um, Islamic sensitivities, there's no mystery around that, i.e., depictions of the Prophet Muhammad, which to me is a bit strange because, as far as I know, there's no explicit prohibition within the Quran against depictions of the Prophet. So it doesn't really make sense. And there's certainly plenty of early depictions of the Prophet in early Islamic architecture, so that doesn't really make sense. So political correctness can be found in some form or another all over the world. Um, just to be clear, I think there are circumstances people should be somewhat sensitive. I mean, you're not going to go to someone's funeral and crack an inappropriate joke at the person's expense. So, yeah, sure, there's times you need to be sensitive. I get that. But the problem with political correctness is it goes too far. It's too shackling. And it isn't about politeness, it is about being shackling. That's the bottom line. So, yes, there's nothing wrong with a certain degree of sensitivity. And I will always condemn bullying and genuine bigotry, but there are limits. And as soon as we become that sensitive, that's when we lose liberty, quite frankly.